Okay, the first lesson, our goal is to be able to determine if a data set represents one or two variable data. So what we need to understand first of all is exactly what is a variable. Okay, because we're talking about one or two variable data. So first of all, a variable is an attribute that can be measured. Okay, it's something that can be measured. So when we're looking at one variable data, the items that we're looking at for this are sets of data that measures one attribute. And the attributes could be the number of red cars, the number of students in a certain grade. Okay, so we're just measuring one thing. So in other words, what we can do is it can be analyzed using items that you've seen before, one being the mean, okay, that's the arithmetic average, the median, which is the middle of the data, if it's lined up from least to greatest, and then you find the middle number. And we can also look at the mode. So if I want to know the number of red cars, I can do that mean, median, and a mode. The number of students in a certain grade, I can do that as well. Okay, so when we're talking about one variable data, there's different ways that we can display it. All right, it's different than when it's two variable. So one of the things we could do are things called pictographs. Now, you really haven't done pictographs in high school. That was, again, something that you would have done in elementary school. But at the same time, some magazines and even newspapers still use pictographs. Tally charts are another way that you can tell whether you're dealing with one variable data. Histograms, and we looked at that with our prerequisite skills. Circle graphs, and we can look at bar graphs, and finally frequency tables. So if I have any one of those six, in most cases it's going to be a single variable data. So we're only measuring one variable. Now when we're looking at two variable data, a few things that we're looking at is data sets that give measures of two variables. So in other words, we're looking at two attributes to see if there's a correlation between them. Okay, so when we're doing stuff like that, the way that we can tell whether something is a two variable data is scatter plots. And you've been doing scatter plots. Another thing would be two-column table of values, an X and a Y. Now, if we're dealing with data, probably it's not going to be an X and a Y. It's going to be measuring the two variables that we're concerned about. Or another thing is ordered pairs. So ordered pairs, scatter plots, two-column table of values, that would indicate to us that we're dealing with two variable data. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at some examples, and we're just going to put the screen up. So the first thing that they ask us to do is to determine if the following represents one or two variable data sets and why. So you just can't have it's this or that, because that's a 50-50 chance that you're right or wrong. So what I'm after is why it is the choice that you've made. So let's look at part A first of all. Okay, we can see that we have a bar graph. So I'm going to say it's one variable. Why? Because it uses a bar graph. And another reason why is the attribute being measured is the temperature. Okay, so month is not being measured. We don't measure months. Okay, that stays standard. So month, temperature. So the attribute I'm measuring is the temperature. Okay, so that's why I decide that that's one variable. If I look at the next one actually just gives us a little scenario, and it says, Mr. Teacher records the number, can't see that, sorry, records the number of classes missed with the final mark of each student. Okay, so I'm looking at recording the number of classes missed, and I'm looking at recording the final mark. So how many of those things am I measuring? Well, I think that that's two variable. Why? Because it is two attributes I'm measuring, and they are the number of class missed and the final mark. Okay, so let's look at the next example. The next example has, scatter plot of final versus average versus quiz average. Quiz average, final. Well, I can see it's a scatter plot, and if you remember from the previous page, that would indicate to me, first of all, that it's two variable data. Why is it two variable data? Because it's using a scatter plot. The next reason why the two attributes that I would be measuring would be the quiz average and the final mark. Okay, so if it is two variable, I should be able to state what my two attributes are. Okay, another word one. Doris made a tally of the number of cars, trucks, and tractors that went down her road in 1 week. Well, I'm going to say that that's one variable. Why? Because all I'm doing is I'm measuring, in other words, counting the kinds of vehicles. Okay, so it's not that, so you can see that it's not necessarily another variable that you're measuring. You're not measuring cars, trucks, and tractors. You're measuring, in other words, counting the kinds of vehicles. So that gives you kind of an example of what you should be able to do when you look at data, whether it's displayed in graphs or even if it's in word type situations. You should be able to determine whether it's one or two variable data and why, as well as the attribute that you're actually measuring. Have some fun!